So, yesterday we had discussed the basic tenets of Marxism, and today I was supposed to discuss the aspects of Marxist literary theory with you. Now, since were so many issues regarding, the net connection yesterday, so I thought I might just record this and send it to you instead, so that even if you have certain issues understanding, the lecture, you can go over it again and again, and then we can, have a class on, solving your issues. Anyway, so today I am going to stress upon two things. One, being the aspects of Marxist literary theory. I'll go over them very quickly, and then I will also talk about certain major critics of the various countries who dealt with the ideas of Marxism. First and foremost, let me just, very quickly revise for you what we've done in the last class. We've talked about Marxism as a theory, as a philosophical stance, which talks about how the capitalist system, dismantles equality in society, and how it splits the society into two basic classes, one being the proletariat, which is the working class, and the other being bourgeois, or the owner class, or the class which controls, or uh, you know has hegemony over the, or subjugates the proletariat. uh, and we've also seen the ways in which that is done, and we've also seen the relation between economy and society and history and culture, how all these things are interrelated as per Marxian theory, and how economy forms the base of society on which the other ideologies are built as superstructure. We've also seen Marx's idea of dialectic, materialism, how he thinks that history, culture, everything is very material by nature, how nothing in society is abstract, how everything is related to the materialism of economy. So today I'm just going to discuss or gloss over certain points regarding Marxist literary theory. Now, the motto of this particular literary theory is to judge the quality of art, not in terms of internal or aesthetic criteria, but its social role. So, what does this particular sentence mean? It means that, you know, Marxist theory stresses upon the idea that literature should not, or culture for that matter, should not be judged in terms of how it has been constructed, or how loyal it has remained in its commitment towards aesthetics or stylization or beauty, all those things. It doesn't give any importance, or rather very less importance, to the form in which literature has been created, but rather it stresses on the content. What the text contains is more important than how the text has been presented. The presentation, the decoration, and the things that relate to aesthetics within a text, those things, for Marxist theorists or Marxist literary theorists, they hardly matter. What matters more is the content of the text, what it is talking about, what it is telling us, not how it is telling us, what it is telling us. So that is exactly the motto, or the aim of Marxist literary theory. The first tenet of this theory, Marxist literary theory, is that art has its own place. Art has a specific role to play in culture, in the creation of a narrative of a society. In this particular context, the Marxist theorists have propounded, or they have said, that man produces anything even in leisure time. That is, that man produces something not just for meeting some need, not just to satisfy a particular need, but also to, but also during leisure time when he has nothing else to do. That means, in other words, Marxists are saying that man creates things in surplus. So what is surplus? Surplus is extra. The colloquial term for surplus is extra. Extra. So when I say, or when they say that man creates in surplus, it means that man creates even when there is no need or no demand for that which is being created. So the first thing that in this point comes across very clearly, that man is a being which creates in surplus, creates extra even during leisure time when there is no need or demand of that which is being produced. So there is basically, in other words, a freedom of production. So man is free to produce the modes of the products of production, the products which are being produced by man. They are being produced with a kind of freedom, because man has freedom. Man is not bound by need, that only when there is a need I will produce. Man is not bound by that need. Man even produces, man produces even during leisure time, or even when there is no need to produce that particular product. So say for example, there is a need in the store for say 100 biscuit packets. The factory manufactures 100 biscuit packets, but it also manufactures 100 more just for future purposes. So man has this tendency of producing in surplus or extra, and therefore whatever is being produced can be produced according to the laws of beauty. So whatever is being produced as extra, that which does not need to have a particular pattern, like say for example, a painter, say a painter has 30 orders to complete. Now these 30 orders have come from 30 different clients, or maybe even less clients. Anyway, so these 30 paintings have to be delivered by the painter, and the clients are very specific as to what paintings they want. Say for example, a client has told the painter that I want a painting of the sky. Another client has specified that he wants a painting with the theme of say city life. So basically the different clients that this painter has have different demands. So he completes his 30 paintings before time, or even within time. So he basically has some leisure time now before the next set of orders come in. Say maybe he has 10 days time during which he can do whatever he feels like. And he being a painter, what does he indulge in? What does he do? He starts painting again. Now whatever he's painting right now during his leisure time does not have to meet any standard. Why? Because those paintings he's making for himself. So he has a freedom to paint whatever he paints during this leisure time. Whatever he's painting now is his extra or his surplus, which does not have to meet the demands of any client. And therefore, he can paint according to his own freedom and his own idea of beauty. Say for example, the painter has been told by a client that I want a painting with the background of nature. Now the client was very specific in specifying that the natural aspects that he wants in the painting would be trees, would be the sky, would be fields, would be little cottages. Right, so the painter paints the painting and he delivers the painting to the client. That's done. That was his assignment, so he's completed that. But now that he has leisure time and he wants to draw or paint rather something on nature, he can use his own imagination to paint or highlight the aspects of nature that he wants. He might not want to highlight the tree or the sky or the cottages. He might want to highlight a specific, fountain. Maybe he wants to paint sheep and shepherd. So when he is painting in his leisure time, he can paint with his own idea or his own freedom of beauty. So when man creates in excess, the excess that he creates is created with the idea of, or according to the laws of beauty. Now this is Marxist theory. This is not universal truth. This is Marxist theory. So this is what the Marxists propound or they insist on. Now They also further say that art has its place in the superstructure. See, art is an ideology. Now, what ideology is, we have already discussed in the previous lecture, so I'm not going to reiterate again. I just want to insist on the point, or rather highlight the point, that the Marxists said that art has its place in the superstructure. So it is an ideology, and therefore it belongs to the superstructure. Now, as I had mentioned in the earlier class, that the base solely or uniformly consists or only consists of the economic relations. Whatever is beyond the economic relations, whatever ideology happens beyond the economic relations, belong to the superstructure. So art being one of that, art not being a part of economic relations, is an ideology which belongs to the superstructure. But the Marxists say that art can exert influence on the base. Art is not fully independent of the base or ideology. I had mentioned in the earlier class that ideology is not independent of the base, and the base is not independent of the superstructure or ideology. So it's a two-way relationship. Both can influence each other. So if economics can influence art, art also has a power to influence economics. It can be used as a means to transform in places where there is still is need. Where other things don't work, or where in the areas where other ideologies do not, or they fail to produce any kind of effect, sometimes art is able to produce an effect. What does this mean? It means that in areas where ideologies like religion, like family, like the legal system, all these things, they fail to produce an effect, sometimes art, or most of the times according to the Marxists, art is able to produce an effect. So basically, art is an effective instrument of social change. That is what the Marxists are saying. So social change which cannot be brought about by other forms of ideology can be brought about by art. Okay? It can also be used in a classless society. So when we reach the utopian stage where there is no class, where there is no discrimination, where there is no ruler, there is no subject, where everybody is equal, art can also be operative in such a society where there are no classes, where the society is not split into various classes. So art can also be seen to be functional in those or in such societies. It is also a cultural weapon in the fight for socialism, where socialism is a weapon in the fight for culture. And that is a syllogistic statement. The ones who have studied philosophy will understand what a syllogism is. Now, this is a perfect example of that. Culture, art being a part of culture, is a participant in the fight for socialism, and socialism is also a part or a participant in the fight for culture. Where there is no social, egalitarianism, where there is no social equality or socialist equality, there is no culture. And when there is no culture, there can be no socialist equality or socialist, utopian situation where every person is able to enjoy equal benefits of the society. That is what socialism is all about. Not equal exactly. According to socialism, the individuals who are part of a society, they will gain the benefits out of the society according to their contribution to the society. Say, for example, a person who works more will be gaining more from society. A person who works a little lesser will gain a little lesser out of society. But what it means is that that person needs less, therefore he works less, and therefore he gains less. So everybody will get benefits out of the society according to their needs. All the individuals who are in a society, they will work towards the betterment of the society, and they will gain the benefits out of the society according to their needs. So that is how social equality or socialist egalitarianism can be brought about. And culture is a very big participant in that, according to the Marxists. The Marxists say that culture is a participant in the struggle for socialist, equality, and the vice versa. Now, further, the Marxists say that art is an instrument and it is used mainly by the subjugated classes to create an awareness not only amongst themselves but also for the bourgeois. The proletariat class, they use art to produce an awareness. What kind of awareness? That they are subjugated, that they are being discriminated against, that there is inequality in society. So all these things are highlighted in the proletariat art or proletariat culture. And culture is used or utilized as a weapon by the proletariat class. Now, how is it or how is art used by the bourgeois class? The bourgeois class are beneficiaries of a system, so they do not want art or they do not use art as an instrument of exposing anything. They just want art to remain idle, to remain as a form of entertainment. So art for both the classes have two different roles. For the proletariat, art is an instrument which is used to expose the ills of the capitalist system, to make people aware how the proletariat class is being subjugated by the capitalist system, by the bourgeois class, how there is a discrimination against them, how or in what ways can they rise above this. The part of money culture can be used as a part of the class struggle that I had talked about in the previous lecture. So culture or art can be used as a form of weapon in the class struggle by the proletariat class. Now for the bourgeois class, however, it is only a form of entertainment, and they want art to remain like that because they do not want the system to change. They do not want the capitalist system to change. Why will they want the capitalist system to change? Because they are the beneficiaries of the system. They get benefits out of this system. So basically they do not wish for the system to change, and therefore they use art not as a weapon but as only a form of entertainment. Now Lenin, however, called culture or art as a cog in the wheel, as a participant in the struggle of the proletariat class against the bourgeois class. Okay. And according to the Marxists, art is also a form of enrichment, of a betterment of understanding. You get enriched, so your understanding of things become better. So art is also a form of enrichment according to the Marxists. According to the Marxists, art should be challenging. You see, the Marxists basically are champions of the class which is subjugated, right? The Marxists speak in favor of the class that is subjugated, that is a proletariat class, of how art can be used or anything can be used to, make lives better for the proletariat class, of how they can be given equal rights in society. So basically what the Marxists want out of art is for it to be challenging the system. So art needs to be challenging, it needs to be progressive, it cannot get stuck in any particular age or era. It has to be progressive, it has to change with time, it has to adapt itself with time, with the situations, with the environment. It has to be reactionary. According to the Marxists, art has to be reactionary. It has to produce some kind of a reactionary effect on the bourgeois class, on the class which is subjugating the proletariat class. So it has to be reactionary and not just escapist entertainment. Art in general terms is something which is meant to be a form of entertainment, but according to the Marxist theorists, art cannot be limited to pure entertainment. It has to be used for much more practical purposes. It has to be used as a weapon, as an influential weapon, which can be used to make people aware of the ills or the advantages and disadvantages of the capitalist system. Now, art as socialist realism. Now, this is a very important section, and you will find elaborate discussion on this particular topic in Raman Selden. And I will not go over the details. I will just gloss over the main highlights of this particular point. Now, this form of artistic movement was very much, popular in Russia in the 1920s. It replaced critical realism of the 19th century or the 1800s. So this particular form of art, socialist realism, was made almost compulsory. It was the, almost like the national form of, art, or production of art. At that point of time, Russia would allow only this form of art to prevail. And this particular form of art had three main tenets or three main ideas. It had to be partynost, something that the Russians called partynost. So, according to socialist realism, art had to be partynost. Partynost, committed to the cause of the party, communist party. So whatever art was being produced at that point of time in the 1920s, and it extended up till the 1960s, up even into the late 1980s, but that from the 1960s it began its decline, and it eventually perished in the 1980s. So from the 1920s to the 1960s, socialist realism was very much prevalent and very popular in Russia. It was the only form of art that was allowed in that country at that point of time, and it had to be partynost. Whatever texts were being created, whatever cultural texts were being created at that point of time, be it painting, be it sculpture, be it literature, be it music, whatever cultural aspect was being created at that point of time, had to be committed to the ideas of the party which was at that point of time in ruling in Russia. It had to have a class bias. So basically, it had to be what the Russians called classovist. What it basically means is that art at that point of time had to be committed to the cause of a particular class, and that class being obviously proletariat. So the class and the party were defined for this particular form of art. At that point of time, art had to produce texts which were committed to the party, the policies and the ideals of the party, the Communist Party, and it had to bring out or highlight the aspects of proletariat class. It had to be committed to the cause of the proletariat or the subjugated class. It could not glorify or in any way, highlight the bourgeois class. Socialist realism was basically a glorification of the proletariat class, of the working class. If you go, online and, just type socialist realism paintings of that time, you will see that they mainly consist of, paintings of workers, and, much importance had been given to the lives and bodies of workers at that point of time, and how what kind of environment they were living in, what kind of environment they were working in. So these are the basic points which were highlighted in socialist realism. It basically means the reflection of the realities of the proletariat life at that point of time in Russia. Now, the third aspect of this particular kind of art was mass accessibility or narodnost, however you may pronounce it. Narodnost is the more prevalent one. So art had to be accessible to the masses. It could not be limited to the elitist group. Now, you see, most of the times in history, we see that more refined art or artistic texts or, cultural aspects were only accessible to the upper classes, the elite classes, because they were refined and they were the ones who were supposed to understand the actual importance or the actual, essence of these artistic inventions. But during these times in Russia, during the 1920s and the onslaught of socialist realism, art was not supposed to be restricted to any particular group of people, any particular class of people. It had to be accessible to the masses, and it had to be appealing to the masses. Masses as in, public in general, everyone in general. So it had to be attractive to them. If they are not attracted by your art, they will not come and, consume your art. So it had to be accessible, it had to be attractive to the masses. Now, according to Marxist theory, socialist, later criticism of this particular form of art, socialist realism, later Marxist criticism of this particular form of art, mentioned that this form of art was actually very shallow and formulaic. It was very mechanical because it had only one dimensional aspect to it. It was only highlighting only a few aspects of society. It was highlighting only the policies and the essence or the ideas of one particular party. It was only highlighting the life of one particular class. So it was very, formulaic, very mechanical, and it was a very shallow form of art form, and this is the criticism that they received from the later theorists of not only Marxism but also of other philosophical movements. And Engels is one of the critics of this particular, movement, artistic movement, and he said that the more opinions of the author remain hidden, the better for the work of art. So he basically says that, it's okay that the author might have an opinion, and author might create a text which is, loaded with his opinion, but it should be presented in such a way that it doesn't seem to be the opinions of the author. It must look like some character in the text is saying all these things. Whenever a character says something, you can always distance yourself from that text. You can always say, no, it's not the author's saying these things. It's not the opinion of the author. It is the opinion of the character. So basically, the presentation should be more journalistic in style. When a journalist reports an event, he has to be very unbiased in his reporting. He has to say, these things happened. He's not supposed to analyze, why that happened, or what should have happened, or why that did not happen. He is not there to analyze those things. He's supposed to report. So, Engels says that, culture should be, or art should be of that kind. Art should only suggest things. It should be indicative, and it should only indicate certain opinions or points of view. It should not, highlight the opinions of the author very blatantly. And then Lenin also said regarding this that word stuffed art is fatal. He says that whenever art becomes stuffed with opinions of the person who is creating that particular form of art, that art becomes fatal or dangerous. So it when say for why is he saying this? It's very simple principle. He's saying this because if, say for example, an art has a very important influence on society, we understand that, right? If art has a very important influence on society, and if art is being used by a certain individual to propagate or to highlight his opinion, then that is going to influence the society. Now, the person who is presenting these opinions, the author who is presenting these opinions may or may not have a good judgment regarding things. But since his art is influential, his opinion might influence some people or most of the people in society. So if he is wrong in judgment, that wrong judgment is passed on to the society, and the society also starts judging in a wrong manner. So the art has to be distanced from the author. Now the public should be given the chance to decide what to accept and what not to, and that can be done only when the author and the text doesn't become one. The author has to remain independent of the text. The author cannot be present within the text, according to the Marxists. The author, they say that the author should, even if he has to, portray or represent his opinions, he has to do it in such a way that people can interpret the texts in their own own ways. That people, according to their personalities, according to their mentalities or capacities of interpretation, they can interpret the text in their own ways. The author should not tell them how to do that. The author should just present the story and let the people judge the story according to their own interpretative skills. Then the Marxist theorists talk about the commitment of the artist to proletariat cause, which I've already mentioned, and this can be done in two ways. The artist or the art form, any art form, can portray their commitment to a particular, cause in two ways: overtly and covertly. Overtly means very openly, very blatantly. When an author very openly criticizes something in his text, he does it very openly. The presentation is done in such a way that the reader or the consumer of the art becomes very much aware. Very easily it becomes apparent to the consumer what the author is talking for and against. And covert means to present your opinions in a very subtle way, in a very hidden manner. You hide your opinions within the text. Now it is up to the reader whether he or the consumer, whether he or she understands the opinion of the author. So the author can either directly say what he wants to say, directly present his bias towards a particular cause, or hide his bias within the text and let the public or the consumer interpret in its own manner. So in art, commitment towards a particular cause, especially the proletariat cause in this particular context, can be shown by the artist in two ways: either in an overt way, in a very open way, or in a covert way, in a very hidden or subtle way. Either the artist can directly say what he is talking about, or he can hide the meanings within the text and let the public or the reader or the consumer dig it out of the text. So those are the ways in which he can act. But according to the Marxists, art has to betray as in portray, present, represent the vision of life. So Marxism is saying that no matter what form it takes up, whether overtly or covertly, art has to betray or portray or present or represent the vision of life, the life of people, the life of human beings within a society, individuals within a society. So if you are talking against them or you're talking in favor of them, whether you are doing this in a very open manner or in a very subtle manner, no matter how you do it, but you will have to talk about the life of individuals within a society. So basically, according to the Marxists, the role of art is to present or represent the vision of life of individuals of a society or the society as a whole. They agree that aesthetic freedom or autonomy is essential when it comes to the works of an artist. Now, the artist has to have a freedom as to how he is working. In order to create something, an artist has to have his or her freedom, but it cannot be absolute. whatever the artist is creating, no matter how much freedom he gets to create that piece of art, his freedom should not be absolute, it should not be total. It should, or in other words, what the Marxists are trying to say is this, that an artist, despite the freedom that is given to the artist for creating what he wants to create, that artist has to have a context. Now, if you have watched the film Titanic, towards the end when the ship is sinking, a group of musicians, they are playing violins on the deck of the ship, and some of the people are sitting in front of them trying to hold on to certain objects and listen to the music, because they have already given up hope of living. And most of the people around them were not interested in the music. They were trying to save themselves during those last moments of the ship. The ship is sinking, people are dying, people are falling off the edges of the ship, and from various parts of the ship into the cold Atlantic waters. And there are these musicians who play music. Now, their intention was not wrong. Their intention was to calm the nerves of the people at that point of time. But the problem was that it did not have the desired effect on the many of the people around. The maximum number of people were not even listening to them. So they were creating art, they were creating music there, but that was not the right context for music. That was not the right time for music. Music, when it was being played in the music hall when the ship was sailing, all right, that was the point when music was being, the music that the musicians were playing, that was being appreciated by the audience. But when the ship was sinking, there was no audience to listen to the music. So their music playing was, it became meaningless. It almost became, a madman's story. So art has to have a context, and the freedom of the artist cannot be absolute. The artist cannot create a piece of art which does not have a context. It has to have a context, and the freedom of the artist cannot be absolute. Now, the next point that the Marxists bring out is very important, and that has been somewhat touched upon earlier in this lecture. The Marxists stress upon the primacy of content. They say, in other words, that content in a text is of prime importance. It is more important than the form of the piece of art. So when you're reading a book, how that book has been written, the style of writing, according to the Marxists, the style of writing is not important, or how that book is packaged is not important. How the book, what colors are present on the pages of the book, that is not important. According to the Marxists, the story is more important. The content of the text is more important. I'm reminded of this painting which was present in the National Gallery in London. And as I was walking past the painting, there were many paintings to gaze at, and so I was not able to, give much time to, any of the paintings. I had to just gloss over some of them. So as I was walking past this particular painting, this painting did not seem to me to be, too remarkable to be present or to be hung on the walls of National Gallery in London. So I just stopped by that painting. I was just looking at the painting. It's a very ordinary painting. Anybody could have drawn that, But what caught my sight was what was being conveyed through the painting was more important than the, style of the painting per se. The style of the painting was very childish. Now I thought that some child had drawn the painting. I don't remember the name of that particular painting. I will have to find that out. But the style of painting was extremely childish. Anybody could have drawn that. But what story that particular painting was suggesting was more important, and that perhaps was the reason why it was given that place in the National Gallery in London. Now, the National Gallery obviously has the most remarkable and the most renowned artists of the world. It has paintings from them, and this painting being there must have been justified for the content of that particular painting. There was a story there was an entire story which was being said, that there was this, small little character who was swinging on a swing in a very rural location, and the sun was setting, and there was a sort of calm in that particular setting. And then there were these tall buildings which were drawn in the distance. So what I think it was suggesting was that the tall buildings and the sunset was happening in the opposite direction of the building. So basically what I think it was the painting which is suggesting is this, that the character was watching this particular sunset because of the setting that he was in, and not because and the people belonging to the city may or may not have that same view that this person has from this rural setting. The cityscape was perhaps not a favorable place for this kind of a view, and this particular rural scape may have for the artist been a better place for this particular view. So the content of the painting was much more important than the the style of painting, because the style of painting to me seemed very ordinary. Anyway, so the content of the text or the piece of art becomes more important for the Marxist theorists, and it is supposed to promote a cause. Now, why is the content more important? Because the content will basically give us a highlighted cause. Because in the previous sections, we've already seen that the theorists have stressed on the fact that art should be biased towards the presentation or representation of a particular class. It has to be classovist and it has to be partynost. So basically, it has to highlight a cause. Art has to the role of art is to highlight a particular cause, a particular class, and therefore it has to have rather more importance should be given to the content of the text rather than the form. And what should be the parts of the content, or what should be highlighted within the content of the text? Whatever human beings experience, whatever society experiences. So the experiences of the society, the experiences of individuals within the society should be the highlights of art, should be the contents of art, and they should be committed towards the highlighting of the way of life of the proletariat, the ideas and thoughts of the particular party that the proletariat class is affiliated to in their class struggle against the bourgeois. And human experience, the process of human experience, should be highlighted through art, because the Marxists feel that minus this particular role, art is just propaganda. If the human factor, according to the Marxists, is removed from art, then art becomes propaganda. So the later Marxists highlighted that human beings have to be given importance in the pieces of art, along with the cause of the proletariat, along with the cause of their struggle. Human beings or specific human experiences have to be highlighted within the pieces of art. If this human experience is removed from art, then art becomes propaganda, preaching. It becomes almost like a political manifesto. So art should not be that. It should not surrender itself to becoming a manifesto or a propaganda. It should have the human element the human equation so that it is given some kind of life. Art should have some kind of life, some aesthetics, and according to the Marxists, the aesthetics of art should arise out of the human experience, which the art form or the piece of art is highlighting. And beauty or aesthetics should not be derived out of the form of the it should not be derived out of any kind of form or any kind of style. It should be derived out of human experience. So basically there are two things that are being highlighted in this particular point, that art should highlight, or rather more importance should be given to the content of the piece of art and not how it is being presented. What is being presented, it should be given more importance, and what should be more presented in the in a piece of art, human experience should be presented in a piece of art, and that should be given more importance than style or form. And that is how art will free itself from being propagandist, and that is how art will establish itself as free of any kind of political agenda. Now, Mao wanted to combine politics and aesthetics. Now, Mao wanted, an aesthetic representation of politics. That is a different take on art. Now, so far whatever we have studied, or so far whatever we've learned, Mao has a different version of it. So far we've studied that text should be free of the opinions of the author. Text should not be mechanical. Text should highlight the way of life of a particular class. Text should highlight the experiences of human beings. Text should not be a manifesto of a particular political party, and more importance should be given to the story or the content of the piece of art rather than the form or the style in which it has been created. But Mao says that both, politics and aesthetics should be combined in art. Aesthetics should be used to highlight politics or political agendas. So these are the two versions of the role of art that we have learned so far. Now, as for accessibility and intelligibility, I have already discussed this point earlier, that refined art is limited to, or sophisticated art is limited to the elite groups, so far in history, till the point Marxism arrived. Art had, a limited audience. Art was limited, or sophisticated or refined art was limited to the consumption of an elite audience only. But with Marxism came this idea that art should not be restricted to any particular class, or the consumption of any particular class or any elitist group. So art should not be, produced for the consumption by any particular class or by any particular elite group. It should be made accessible and intelligible. What is the meaning of intelligible? Intelligible means understandable. So art should be understandable, it should be understood by everyone, and it should be accessible to everyone. So art should not be restricted to a particular group but to everyone. Art should not be making sense to a particular group but to everyone. So meaning has to be given in such a way to a particular piece of art so that everybody is able to participate in understanding the point of the text. Now, if you are, say, given a text which you do not understand, say for example in English class we suddenly start studying in the Japanese language, will you be able to understand that? You won't be able to understand that. And that is the point of the English language. It is a language which connects all the cultures of the world, most of the cultures of the world. We study texts in English, in the English language, which have been written in other languages. So English is basically called a lingua franca. English has made culture accessible to most people in the world. Somebody who doesn't understand the African language will be able to understand a text in African language when it is translated in English. Now there is an entire politics of translation, but I'm not going into that. What I'm trying to say is this: a text has been made available to most of the people around the world through the English language, and that is the point of art. Art has to be made accessible to most people in the world and not be restricted to a certain group of people who maybe enjoy an elitist position in the society. It should be made popular, pop culture. I cannot think about pop culture at this point, popular culture at this point. So, like pop culture, it should be, art should be made popular, and it should be constructed in such a way, or it should be composed in such a way, any piece of art should be composed in such a way that it can subvert or totally reverse mainstream culture. And art should confront the masses. Now that is the most important aspect of culture, that it should not only justify, it should not only be attractive to the subjugated classes, it should also have the role of making these subjugated classes aware of their position in society. It should tell them that yes, you are subjugated. In the previous lecture I had mentioned that the greatest challenge of any class struggle is this, that the class has to understand that it is subjugated. Most of the times the people or the individuals belonging to the subjugated class, they do not understand that they are subjugated, because they have been interpolated, because they have been convinced through hegemony that it is natural for them to be subjugated. We've studied all these concepts in the last lecture. So through the use of hegemony, through the use of interpolation, the subjugated classes are made to believe that it is natural for them to be subjugated. Now the role of art is to bring them out of that misconception about themselves. It is the role of art to make them aware that they are subjugated and to present ways in which they can come out of that subjugation. So art is supposed to be used as a weapon, as an instrument through which the subjugated classes may be made aware of their subjugation, made aware of the fact that they are subjugated, that they are deprived, that they are exploited. And art should provide ways in which the subjugated class can come out of the subjugation, can come out of the deprivation and the exploitation. They can come out, or they can rise up against the bourgeois class, which has so far been subjugating them, so far been exploiting them, depriving them of their actual position in society. So the role of art is to make people aware and then provide them with ways in which they can come out of their subjugation. So that is basically the role of art, and that is the primary argument that all the Marxist theories, no matter what version of art they are supporting or they are highlighting, that is the main idea behind all the Marxist theorists, that art should be used as a weapon for the presentation of subjugation of a particular class in a society, so that that particular class becomes aware that they are subjugated. Bernard Shaw had once said that the characters on stage, when he is writing comedy, he makes the audience laugh at certain comic characters on stage so that later on they can laugh at themselves, because what the characters on stage are actually reflecting or representing are actually persons from the audience. They are actually representing actual people from the society. They are actually, the comic characters on Bernard Shaw's stage, they are actually representing actual people. They are fictional characters having actual characteristics of people in the society. So when the audience is laughing at the characters who are playing comic characters on stage, they are actually laughing at themselves, because they are the ones who are being reflected or represented on the stage. So art has to make people aware, has to inform people that whatever I'm portraying, the people I'm portraying, those people are actually you. If you are feeling bad for these people, you have to understand that you should feel bad for yourself, that you are subjugated. And these are the ways in which you can come out of your subjugation. So that is basically the role of art, and that is the basic tenet of art that is, presented by most of the Marxist theorists, literary theorists, no matter in what version they say it. Now, having gone through the main aspects of, you know, Marxist literary theorists, now we will quickly go over, certain people, certain renowned Marxist literary theorists. You will get all these details in the PowerPoint presentation that I've sent you, but I'll just go over them, gloss over them. And in the PowerPoint presentation, you'll see that these theorists have been enlisted country-wise. So first we'll begin with Russia. So the major Marxist theorists in Russia would be Leon Trotsky, and his most famous work was Literature and Revolution, which was published in 1924. And this particular critic was critical of the craze to be pals with socialism and with revolution. He asserts that art can become a strong ally of revolution only by remaining faithful to itself. So art for art's sake. So art has to be presented as art should remain an art form. Art should not move into the arena of politics, and art should not be a manifesto of politics. Art should be art, and through artistic means, artists should point out various political opinions, yes, but through artistic means. Art should not, become politics itself. So he says that he asserts that art can become a strong ally of revolution. Now, art can become a part of revolution, or it can be influential to a revolution only when it remains an art form and it doesn't become a part of politics. Now, Georgy Plekhanov, in his Art and Social Life, he claimed that aesthetic autonomy or freedom in certain social phases is a protest against the repressive theory of art. Aesthetic judgment requires both historical knowledge and social insight. In art, form is as important as content. So we have so far studied the Marxism literary criticism with the idea that content is more important than form. But here is one, literary theorist, Marxist literary theorist, who says that form is as important as content. So what the story, is, that is important, but how the story is being presented is also important. So this particular critic, Georgy Plekhanov, is somebody who you can use as an, alternate or a deviant version of the dominant idea of art in Marxism. Then comes Germany, and the most important name in that would be Theodor Adorno. And he wrote a number of books, and his most important one was Aesthetic Theory, which was posthumously published, as in it was published after his death in 1970. Now, Adorno is a key figure of the Frankfurt School of Marxist thinkers. Again, you will find this in Raman Selden, and I will not go over the details of this particular movement, but you will find all the details there, because obviously we are lacking in time. He critiques the question of aesthetic realism and argues that the representation of reality in art is oblique, and hence art is a negative knowledge of the actual world. So Adorno, basically what he points out is that art is a form through which reality is presented in an oblique manner, as in not in a direct manner. You studied, I think in physics you studied, physics or maths, I don't remember, oblique angle, something which is not direct but a little deviant. So in art, reality is represented, according to Adorno, not in a direct manner but in an oblique manner, in an indirect manner, because the artistic or the piece of art, the text, is representing fictional characters. Because if it is representing real characters, then it becomes a biography or an autobiography. If you are saying that it is a piece of art, mostly fictional work, then the characters that are being represented in the text are fictional, and therefore they are only representations of reality and not reality itself. So basically reality is being presented, but not in a direct fashion, but in an indirect or oblique fashion. So that is how Theodor Adorno looks at art, and therefore he says that art is the negative knowledge of the world, of the actual world. So whatever you are viewing in an artistic, or in a text or in a narrative, that is only a negative knowledge of the actual reality. So it's not a direct representation of actual reality, but a negative knowledge. Not negative doesn't mean in a negative positive sense. Negative as in indirect representation of reality. And the next German critic who has to be named is Walter Benjamin, and his most famous work was The Work of Art in the Age of Mechanical Reproduction. And I think you should go through this particular piece, because it is very relevant to the present age and the representation of art in the present age as well. Now this work was published in 1935, and in this he engages in understanding, Walter Benjamin, he engages in understanding the impact of technology on art. How technology has been instrumental in making art more accessible to the public. Through technology, art has become more accessible to more and more people, to the masses. You go to a cinema hall, and there you have a number of people watching a particular movie together at the same time, and there are subsequent shows through which more and more people are able to watch that film. In a home theater, obviously there are only a few people who will sit around in a studio situation and watch a particular film. But in a cinema hall, number of people can watch the movie at the same time, and the subsequent shows makes that particular film accessible to many people at the same time. So mass production has plucked art from the glorified throne of time and place and removed its aura. So Benjamin also says that because art has become so accessible to so many people, to the masses, it has lost its glorified idea. Initially art was seen as a glorified idea, as something that only a few people could produce and only a few people could consume, because art was restricted to, or artistic pieces were restricted to only a few groups of people. Milton used to write or used to compose poetry which used to be distributed amongst only the nobility in Cromwell's court. So only a few people were able to read his poetry, and that was the initial concept of art, that art was meant only for the refined classes, for the sophisticated classes, for the upper classes, for the nobility, people who were supposed to have an understanding of art. Now that is debatable. So when it was restricted to this particular group, a particular group of sophisticated elites, at that point of time art held a position of, it held a glorified position in society, that it is something that is beyond the reach of most people. it had a very glorified idea about itself. But when it became accessible to the masses, when everybody was able to consume art, when everybody became a consumer of art, it lost its, glorified position. It lost its aura, according to Walter Benjamin. Now, the loss of halo is no decay, but only a concomitant of the secular productive forces of history. So, Walter Benjamin doesn't criticize the loss of this particular glorification of art. He says that this has given art a secular flavor. Art has become secular when more and more people are able to consume artistic pieces. When more and more people gain access to artistic pieces, it becomes secular. When everybody has the equal opportunity to participate in cultural activities, it is a secular activity. So art has become a secular activity because of the beginning of its distribution amongst masses. When more and more people are able to gain access to art, it becomes secular. The next literary theorist, Marxist literary theorist would be Bertolt Brecht. And this particular critic come artist come playwright is a very important aspect of Marxist literary theory. Now, his ideas have had a very important bearing on Marxist literary criticism. Now, he has a very interesting take on literary criticism. He says that realism is okay. Art should be realistic, that art should represent reality. But in order for art to have an effect on the audience has to be alienated from art. The audience has to understand that whatever they are watching on, whatever is happening on the stage, whatever they are watching is not real. It is a fictional representation of reality. And it is only through this alienation that the audience will be affected by that piece of art, according to Brecht. He says that alienation effect creates illusionist realism only to shatter it when it is most intense, so as to enable the audience to distance themselves from stage characters and think critically of the presented slice of life. So when an audience, say, is watching a play and the audience realizes that the characters on stage are doing something right or doing something wrong, the audience will be able to realize this only when they sit in the position of a judge, not when they actually are participating in the play itself. If the play, in other words, is too realistic, the audience will identify themselves with the characters on stage, and whatever the characters are doing on the stage, the audience will connect with that. Now, if the audience becomes the characters on stage, then the distance between art and audience will break down. And if that happens, then the meaning of the play will be, or the role of the play will fail altogether, according to Brecht. According to him, there should be a distance between art and the consumer of art, between the play and the audience. So if a character is doing something right on the stage, then the audience should, if there is a distance, only then will the audience realize that the character is doing something right. If the audience sees himself in the place of that character, and if the character is doing right, then the audience will feel, okay, I'm also doing right. But if the character is doing wrong, and the character, you know, unknowingly, say for example, let me put it this way, in Sophocles, in Oedipus, when you were reading the play, you realized that Oedipus was going in the wrong direction. Now, if you had too much sympathy for this character, Oedipus, right from the beginning, if you connected yourself or placed yourself in the position of Oedipus more than it is intended by the playwright, then the wrongdoings of Oedipus would seem justified to you. The things that Oedipus was doing, the wrong things that he was doing, unknowingly, but the wrong things that he was doing on, in the text, if you placed yourself in the position of Oedipus, then you would justify the wrong things that Oedipus was doing. Now, because you were placed at a distance with Oedipus, so you were informed from the very beginning who Oedipus was or what was about to happen to him. You knew it from the beginning, or from, through various stages of the play, you knew what was going to happen to him. You knew that he was going to, exile himself, that he is going to react in a certain fashion when he came to know that he was married to his mother and had children with her, and he had killed his father. So you knew those things, so there was a distance between you and Oedipus. And had there been no distance between you and Oedipus, you would go on Oedipus's journey with him without knowing what is going to happen to you or what is going to happen to the character. And then that particular effect that the play was supposed to have on you, you would not have that. As an audience of a tragedy, you're supposed to feel all kinds of emotions. You're supposed to feel empathy. But had you been in, Oedipus's place, you would not feel empathy. You would only feel, despair. You would only feel sad. You would only feel guilty. But that is not the intent of any tragic play. The intent of a tragic play, according to Aristotle, is to produce catharsis, where the audience goes through all kinds of emotions. But you will not be able to go through all kinds of emotions if you are placed in the role of a particular character. So there has to be a distance between you and the characters which are on stage doing things. Right? So you have to place yourself in the position of a judge, from where you will judge the activities of the characters on stage. So there has to be, and it is very important that there is a distance between the audience and the text. So that is what Bertolt Brecht propagated, and he uses this alienation effect, this distancing of the audience from the text, as a tool in this direction. The next literary theorist comes from Hungary, and he's called George Lukács, and his most important book was History and Class Consciousness, Studies in Marxist Dialectics, which he had written in 1923. Now he examines the author-world interrelation. Author bears the pressure of society. According to Lukács, the author bears the pressure of society and also acts upon it. He is famous for his theory of reification, literary meaning making material of what is abstract. So again, materialism. He is a champion of materialism. He says he champions this cause of materialism in Marxist literary theory. He says that it is the job of art to make materials out of abstract ideas. This term sheds light on the capitalist process of depersonification of human beings on the one hand and subjectification of things or objects on the other. So basically, under the capitalist system, what happens is a person, an individual human being, becomes dehumanized when he goes to the factory to work. Under the capitalist system, when a worker goes to the factory to work, he doesn't remain a human being, he becomes a part of production. He is given the identity of an object, and objects are given identities of subjects or human beings. So subjectification of objects and objectification of human beings, that is something that is that is still prevalent in the capitalist society. If you take the example of all the workers who work in the IT companies, they once they enter the buildings of their employers, they are basically numbers. They are given certain ID numbers, and when they log in on their computers, they are numbers. They are not known personally by all the employees in the company, but they are known as numbers in the company. So the capitalist system, under this system, human beings become objects. They are depersonified and they become objects, and consequently social relations change from relations between persons to relations between things. So when a person is dehumanized, when a person is depersonified, you've studied in rhetorics, personification, where non-living objects are personified in poetry for artistic purposes, but under capitalist purposes, human beings are depersonified, where they are treated as objects. And when human beings are treated as objects, the relationships between the human beings, they become relationships between things, between objects, and man is robbed of his role as creator and mechanically performs the ready-made social role thrust upon him. Now, I might have, spoken about this scene from Modern Times by Chaplin. There is a scene in Modern Times where Chaplin is seen to be a worker in a factory, and his job is to tighten screws all day long. So there's a conveyor belt in front of him, screws come in front of him, and he's seen to tighten screws with pliers, and he's always tightening screws. And he's so used to tighten screws that when the conveyor belt is not moving, even then his hands are moving in that particular fashion. So he becomes like a machine, he becomes mechanical, he becomes like an object. So that was a very important representation of this idea, that the capitalist system, what it does to a human person, it depersonifies a human person. It almost transforms a person into a machine, and the person who is depersonified mechanically performs any ready-made social role thrust upon him. There's a social role given to every individual under the capitalist system. Every individual is told that you are supposed to do, your role in society is this, you're supposed to do this for your survival. So that is what that particular person is seen to do all his life. He becomes machine-like, he becomes mechanical, and that particular role is thrust upon him. It's not that he wants to take that up. Okay, so for example, the son of a doctor doesn't want to become a doctor, but most of the people, they expect him to become a doctor. Or the daughter of a lawyer doesn't want to become a lawyer but something else, but the society expects that person, that child, to become a lawyer like the parent. So that is a role that is socially thrust upon that human being. From Italy came Antonio Gramsci, and in his prison notebooks, which were written between 1929 to 1935, he talked about the concept of hegemony, which we have discussed in much detail in the last lecture, so I'm not going to go over that again. It's just that I want to point out, or I want to remind you, that hegemony is a system through which the dominant class convinces the subjugated class that it is very natural for them to remain as the subjugated class. It is very natural for them to be subjugated and remain so all their life. So, and hegemonic forces, they work through ISAs and RSAs. We've already discussed them in our previous lecture, in our discussion of Althusser. So Gramsci and Althusser have to be read, in tandem. And then came France, where Louis Althusser came, and Ideology and Ideological State Apparatuses in 1970. That is the book where Althusser basically points out the various ways in which a particular class can be, coaxed into understanding or coaxed into believing that they are actually, or they may be interpolated into believing that it is natural for them to be subjugated, and if they don't comply, if they don't listen, then there can be the use of the RSA or the repressive state apparatuses, who can force these individuals into complying or conforming with the dominant ideology. Now, these we've already discussed, so I'm not going over them again. And the last of this lot would be from England, where Christopher Caldwell, whose most famous book Illusion and Reality, published in 1937, talks about changing the parameters of aesthetic evaluation. The value of art is not to be judged in terms of beauty or universal truth, but how successfully it embodies the working of historical forces. So how the role of art, according to Christopher Caldwell from England, the role of art is to highlight how history or historical forces worked in particular contexts, and it, you know the value of an artistic piece should not be judged in terms of how beautiful it is or how universal the truth is that is represented through it, but how successfully it highlights the workings of historical forces or how history works. So basically, art is supposed to represent history. Art is supposed to represent not beauty or universal truth or some abstract philosophy, but history. In Illusion and Reality, he says he tries to trace major aesthetic developments to changes in the economic relation in the age in which these were produced. So he basically, in this particular book, Illusion and Reality, he draws a relationship between art and economics, and how this relationship between the base of economics and the ideology of the superstructure of art is related. He tries to trace the relationship between the base and the ideology or the superstructure of which art is a part. So the relationship between economics and art, the relationship between base and superstructure. And then came the most important name in English Marxist literary theory, and in his book Marxism and Literary Criticism in 1976, and also in Criticism and Ideology in 1976, and he he raised certain basic questions like the relationship between text and ideology. So he talked about how a text can be used to represent an ideology, how art, becoming an ideology in itself, becomes a representation of an ideology. It is only through the representation of an ideology, it is only through the representation of a certain set of ideas that art can become an ideology. And that is the role of art, that is how it becomes a part of the social structure. It cannot be, according to Terry Eagleton, art cannot become a part of the social structure based just on its beauty or universality. It has to, or the universality of the truth that is presented through it. Art can become a part of the social structure, of the superstructure, built on the base of economics, only through the representation of an ideology. It has to have a purpose. So art, basically, according to Terry Eagleton, has to have a purpose. It has to have a context. Nothing meaningless can be represented through art. If that is done, if an art piece is meaningless, it doesn't become a part of social, of the social structure, or it doesn't become canonical. It doesn't appeal to people. Anything meaningless doesn't appeal to people, right? So if you just write something completely meaningless which does not have any context whatsoever. According to Terry Gilton, there is no place of that sort of art in the social structure. According to him, art has to have a certain contextual meaning in order to become a part of ideology, in order to become a part of the social structure. And he says that he raises this question of the relation between text and ideology. He thinks that art is held within ideology. He thinks that art is held within ideology, can distance itself from it, for it makes us to feel and perceive the ideology from which it springs. So basically, art has to explain the origin of the or its relationship with the ideology that it is representing. You're just representing an ideology, that won't do. You have to express your relationship with that ideology. So the author or the artist has to present or has to justify why he is presenting a certain ideology. So there are two things working here, that art has to present an ideology in order to become a part of social structure. Second, the artist has to justify why he is aligning himself with that particular ideology, or he has to represent his ideas of that particular ideology. Each element of a society's superstructure has its own tempo of development, and each aspect of art has its own speed of development, own tempo of development. But no matter what tempo or speed an artistic piece has in terms of representation, it has to represent an ideology. No art form can be called an art form without the presence of an ideology, without a presence of a certain set of ideas, without the representation of a certain context, of a certain cause. Art has to align itself with some sort of ideology to become meaningful, according to Terry Eagleton. So these are the main aspects of Marxist literary theory, aspects and people related to the Marxist literary theory. And I would suggest you go through all the books that we have, sent you. And even after all these lectures and all the books that we've sent you, even after that, if you feel that there is a need for, and I am sure there will be questions and queries, and there will be need for a rejig of the concepts of Marxism and Marxist literary theories, do tell us so that we can arrange for another class on them. Make a list of all your queries, and we can work on them together in a particular class, which can be arranged sometime later next week. Okay.